This evening is very special. We have a unique opportunity to hear from an outstanding speaker of international stature. This alone is more than sufficient to justify our presence. But this evening is also a celebration. In fact, it is the beginning of a year-long celebration of some very special anniversaries for business education at Colorado State. This year, 2006, is the 50th anniversary of the introduction of the Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration. This year is also the 40th anniversary of the founding of the College of Business at CSU. And finally, 2006 marks the 30th anniversary of the accreditation of the Graduate Business Program at CSU. Each of these anniversaries is a major milestone for the college and for all of us to celebrate. Yet despite these major milestones, we're here this evening to celebrate much more than just CSU history. We're here to celebrate the fact that we are also direct beneficiaries of the unique opportunities offered by the College of Business. Our college is large enough to offer a wide breadth of concentrations, courses, and certificates in business. Yet it's small enough for each student, myself included, to develop personal relationships with the faculty and administration. Relationships that help us learn and grow and perhaps allow us to help guide the future of the college and what it will offer to future classes of students. The College of Business has a diverse array of organizations in which we can all participate and give back to our college and our community. The Business College Council, the Entrepreneurship Center, the Business Diversity and Leadership Alliance, professional business fraternities, and many other similar organizations are available to any student. Please recognize, however, that these unique attributes of our college aren't just important to us as students. They're important to business and academic leaders throughout the country, and they're a part of what is now propelling the CSU College of Business steadily up the national rankings of this nation's schools of business. And as students, and soon to be graduates, we will benefit directly from that growing prestige. Our College of Business may have started as a business school for Colorado, but it has already become a leading business school in the region. And I am confident that with its unique benefits and proactive response to the world's changing business environment, that the Colorado State University College of Business will very quickly become a business school worthy of national and international recognition. That accomplishment is what we are really celebrating this evening. And now, I'm pleased to introduce a man who has played a major role in shaping the CSU College of Business, a man who can take personal pride in what this college has become, a man who 40 years ago accepted the challenge to become the first dean of the College of Business at Colorado State. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Don Dobler.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. I'm not sure all of that's so, but thank you for the introduction. You know, this event and the following events that commemorate various milestones in the history of the College of Business are all very happy and very gratifying things for me. Tonight, the Dean has asked me to give you a thumbnail sketch of the history of the college's first 20 years. And I said, gee, that's quite an assignment. How long do I get? He said, oh, 3 to 5 minutes, something like that. So this is going to be a brief thumbnailer. In any event, in 1966, when the college was started, a small handful of us, a dozen, perhaps 15 faculty members, explored and debated just how we should nourish and develop this new organization. Along the way, it was a lot of work, and also it was a lot of fun. It took us and those who joined us along the way about 7 to 10 years to get the college firmly established and to get the undergraduate and the graduate programs accredited at the national level. The next 10 years were devoted primarily to refining and expanding the college programs and its objectives. And overall, in retrospect, I think we were successful in creating a fairly solid operation. When I retired in 1986, I wrote an article for one of the university publications. It was entitled, guess what? Colorado State's College of Business, the first 20 years. And I'd like to read to you one short paragraph that appears near the conclusion of this article to kind of give you a flavor of what we were trying to do and what we thought we had done reasonably well in those early years. So if I can find this. Yeah, it starts out, what distinguishes Colorado State's business school from other good collegiate schools of business? Fundamentally, it's the combination of 5 interacting characteristics. Number 1, extremely high-quality students. And boy, I'll tell you, when you're on the faculty, you sure like to see those folks. Number 2, a high-quality faculty, most of whom had practical business experience before they came with us. Number 3, strong analytical and practical programmatic orientations. Now, for this particular item, the focus is on 2 words, analytical and practical. And the reason I take time to emphasize this is that back in those days, the good old days, a combination of those 2 things was rather unique in academia. Item number 4, a caring relationship with students. As far as I'm concerned, if we had to pick one item out of this list that I'm citing to you, I think that may be the one that, to me, I would consider the most important. Number 5, a close, pragmatic relationship with the business community. I don't have to tell most of you people who are here tonight that's a very important item as well, because without that, you don't get a business program that has the practical flavor that it should have, in my opinion. So, that's the way it looked to us toward the end of 1986, when I was deciding to create a new life for myself. Now, as I talk with Dean Menon and some of the faculty that I still know, and it seems that the old cliche, time marches on, indeed is true. It marches on, and I don't know as many as I used to know, obviously. But in any event, as I talk to these people, I get a strong sense that the college is still headed in essentially the same directions that we were trying to do back in those early days. And I suspect in the process that the present faculty and the administration will continue the work that they've been doing the last few years to take this operation to the next level. And I hope you are right, my friend. So this is all good news to me. And I wish all of the folks involved well in all of these future endeavors. Now I want to take just a moment, since I think I've probably used up the dean's allotted time for me. I want to take just a moment to thank the dean for including the old guy in these activities. Now, I have the pleasure at this juncture in the process to introduce to you a gent who came to Colorado State 15 years ago, if I've got the facts straight. He came as an assistant professor in the marketing department. And 10 years later, guess what happened? He became the dean of this operation, and for the last 5 years, Ajay Menon has served in that capacity. And it's my pleasure at this time to introduce to you the dean of CSU's College of Business, Dr. Ajay Menon.
Don, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and you're one of them. So thank you for all what you did for Colorado State University and the business school. Ladies and gentlemen, this business school would not be where it is, and I am very proud of this business school, and you'll find that out here in about 10 seconds. I am proud because this is a college of business that started 40 years ago with the vision of a man who thought we could go great heights. I'm glad to hear at least that Don Dobleth feels that we might be still in the same direction. When he said that, I was wondering, geez, is that good or bad? We haven't done much, you know. But Don, very gracious of you, and I thank you for your comments and your leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to Colorado State University, and this evening's lecture by the noted Peruvian economist Hernando De Soto. But before I introduce Mr. De Soto, I think a context for his visit here to Colorado State University is in order. As Chris Hutchins mentioned, this year we celebrate several milestones. And anniversaries are points in our life and in our time when we reflect on our journey. We reflect on our vision and our mission moving forward. And we do the same here within the business school at Colorado State University. Our vision for this business school is very simple: to be a business school that is unequivocally the very best in the Rocky Mountain region. Simple. We have 5 very formidable competition: BYU, University of Utah, DU, Arizona State University, and that little school southwest of here. Clearly, CU, Leeds School of Business, is a formidable competition from where I stand. And I appreciate their presence because it forces me to push forward. Our vision to build a business school that is unequivocally the very best in the Rocky Mountain region is guided by a very simple principle that business must have a social context. Business must have a social context. And for us, that's very easy because social context is just what Colorado State University is all about. You see, I belong to a university that houses the leading infectious diseases program in the nation. It houses one of the best veterinary medicine program in the nation. It houses one of the best atmospheric sciences program in the nation. It houses one of the best biochemistry, chemistry, statistics in this country. 38% of all Colorado high school students pursuing math, technology, it's the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics go to Colorado State University. This is a phenomenal university right in your backyard. And each of these disciplines and each of these programs pursue research that address challenging global human challenges. So it's against this background that we wish to build this vision of ours, to build a business school that is unequivocally the very best in the Rockies. We have embarked on achieving this vision through innovative academic programs, practice-based research, and meaningful outreach efforts. And within the realm of academic programs, late yesterday afternoon, our faculty in the College of Business approved a new curriculum for a concentration in the Master of Science degree in Business Administration, which we call Global Social and Sustainable Enterprise. This is a program that ties the college's 4 key academic thrusts: globalization, innovation management, business processes, and business ethics and social responsibility. We hold these 4 key academic thrusts very close in all of our planning. A key goal of the new program is to train young minds to become engines that foster private enterprise creation in underdeveloped nations, such that we can bring entrepreneurial management skills and solutions to address the huge human challenge of poverty and social ill. To provide a perspective on the drivers of wealth and poverty, we have invited the founder and chairman of Peru's Institute for Liberty and Democracy. Following the 1948 coup d'etat in Peru, Hernando De Soto, the son of a diplomat, moved with his family to Switzerland when he was 7 years old. While spending 3 months each summer back in his home, his native Peru, and always struck by how little his cousins and distant families in Peru had relative to his surroundings in Europe. He attended college in Geneva while maintaining a strong interest in understanding the underlying cause of wealth disparity in the land of his ancestry and the Western world. His curiosity to fully understand why some countries are rich and others poor led Mr. De Soto to return to Peru in 1979, leaving behind a very successful career in Europe. Hernando De Soto's decades-long work with heads of state and in the streets of impoverished nations on behalf of property rights for the poor have led to widespread global acclaim and recognition. In 1999, Time magazine chose Mr. De Soto as one of the 5 leading Latin American innovators of the century. Forbes magazine highlighted him as one of the 15 innovators who will reinvent your future. The New York Times magazine wrote, to the leaders of the poor countries, De Soto's economic gospel is one of the most hopeful things they have heard in years. The Economist magazine identifies his Institute for Liberty and Democracy as one of the top 2 think tanks in the world. In October 2005, over 20,000 readers of Prospect magazine and Foreign Policy in the United States ranked him among the top 15 public intellectuals in the world. Mr. De Soto is a member of the International Labor Organization's World Commission on the Global Dimensions of Globalization, the United Nations Development Program Task Force to examine private resources for development, the Expert Group on Development Issues, and is a member of the Research Advisory Council at Goldman Sachs. Mr. De Soto has served as the economist for the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, as president of the Executive Committee of the Copper Exporting Countries Organization, as CEO of Universal Engineering Corporation, the largest consulting engineering firm in continental Europe, and as a principal of the Swiss Bank Corporation and governor of Peru's Central Reserve Bank. His 2 books, The Other Path and The Mystery of Capital, has been international bestsellers, translated in some 20 different languages. Obviously, it has to be different. Okay. For his many contributions and influences, Mr. De Soto has received death threats. He's been a target of assassination attempts and accolades. So on this occasion, we'll stick with the accolades. The Freedom Prize in Switzerland, the Fisher Prize in the United Kingdom, in 2002, the Goldwater Award, the Adam Smith Award from the Association of Private Enterprise Education, the CARE Canada Award for Outstanding Development Thinking. In 2003, Downey Fellow at Yale University, and inducted into the Democracy Hall of Fame International at the National Graduate University. In 2004, he was given the Templeton Freedom Award, the Milton Friedman Prize for Advancing Liberty, and in 2005, an honorary degree of Doctor of Letters from the University of Buckingham, United Kingdom. He has been awarded the Compass Award for Strategic Directions by Forbes magazine, and in 2006, the Bradley Award from the Bradley Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, I better stop here and let you welcome Mr. Hernando De Soto to Colorado State University.
I'm especially glad to have been invited here by the College of Business and its program on global sustainable enterprise. And the key word here is sustainable, because we already know since the fall of the Berlin Wall now that the market economy and private business knows no rival. It's a system that was first identified in history in all its dimensions, or most of the dimensions that could be known at the time, by Adam Smith over 230 years ago. And since then, it's defeated feudalism, it's defeated patrimonialism, it has defeated communism. And here it is. It's the only game in town. Practically, there is no country in the world, except maybe North Korea, maybe Zimbabwe, maybe Cuba, that denies that this is a driving engine of growth in the world. And yet it is not sustainable. And it is not sustainable for a long time. I mean, the first time that really big private entrepreneurship was seen in the world in recent centuries was 7 centuries ago, when the Arabs began having a commercial empire all throughout the Mediterranean that crossed all the way into Asia. At that time, 700 years ago, you could write a check in Damascus and you could collect in Canton, but it didn't last, as we know today. So it's not exactly sustainable. Private business has come and gone, and it has gone away in critical areas of the world, which are today very troubled ones indeed. It's also come and gone in Latin America, where I come from, 5 times. There's an economist and historian called Junguito of Colombia that actually remarks that 5 times we who admired the United States and South America and had no doubt recognizing that you needed stable currencies and you needed free trade and you needed private enterprise, actually did everything that the International Monetary Fund would ask us today on 5 occasions since we obtained our independence from Spain in the 1820s. And we lowered our tariffs and we brought down our non-tariff obstacles, and 5 times we have returned to populism, or 5 times we have brought up socialist regimes, which means that somehow or other it did not catch on. It even slipped for a while. In Europe, there's a wonderful book that I recommend anybody to read if you want to know just what kind of a risk we ran, when Walter Lippmann wrote The Good Society back in the 1930s, and remarked how, or early 40s, and remarked how, in effect, the 2 last bastions of liberal democracy that were strong, which were Britain and the United States, were nearly slipping into fascism, while the world was nearly slipping into fascism and communism, indicated that things weren't working there. And we've seen the fall of the Berlin Wall. And everybody thought that now that the Berlin Wall had fallen, we'd all just slip into a market economy. And we didn't. We know it today. We know that Beijing is no longer the center of exporting communism and other forms of and other political organizations in the world, and we know that Moscow certainly isn't on that line. Both of them seem to be heading towards a market economy, in some cases very successfully so, but yet we know that throughout the world, as you may have heard in the last speeches at the General Assembly of the United Nations, there are many leaders that are saying that it isn't really working, that it isn't helping the poor. So the word sustainable, and what your program is all about, investigating What do we do about making this sustainable is of the essence, because history indicates that it can slip by. That even when the system has no overt rivals, if it doesn't reach everybody, if it doesn't satisfy all constituencies or a great amount of these constituencies, it can travel. And that's going to be the subject of my conversation with you tonight, to tell you what I know about it. Now, not everybody agrees with what I'm going to tell you. There's a lot of people who have got different ideas of why the system doesn't hold. We go all the way to early German philosophers who believed that one of the problems had to do with ethnic structure. We're not all made for competitiveness. There was something also about Protestantism, which would have meant that all of us who have a Catholic upbringing are not made for competition, are not necessarily made for individuality. We hear it today. One of your great political scientists, Samuel Huntington, says that we are different civilizations after all, and that what makes you so successful is that you come from a culture of trust. And you have to trust each other in market economy, because a market economy, after all, is all about making deals, about dealing with people that you've never met before, and yet being able to put together resources in such ingenious ways that you create a surplus value, you create additional wealth. And somehow or other, that isn't happening to us, and they say that the thing has got to be cultural. And unfortunately, there was recently a study, I think now about 2-3 years ago, but it was made public in Peru just, I think about a year ago in my part of the world, in which they'd done a behavioral study. I think it was the University of Michigan. And they'd gone through 80 countries throughout the world to ask the following question: do you trust other people of your nationality? And the reply was in Norway that 65% of Norwegians said, yes, I do trust other Norwegians. And when it came to the same question was asked to Swedes, 60% of Swedes said, yes, they did trust other Swedes. By the time we get to the United States, the figure is somewhat lower, but still respectable. 50%, I think, or close to 50% of North Americans say they do trust each other. But when we come to Peru, it's about 5%. And we, of course, actually feel I at least feel kind of proud about this figure, because the Brazilians are about 3%. So I was really happy when I got invited by Dean Menon to come and talk to you, because I said, obviously here they trust everybody. I've got to come here. Nobody in Peru trusts me. Or only about 5%. So when I came through migrations, and I landed in Washington, D.C., knowing that people fully trusted in your country, and I looked at the blue eyes of the migrations officer, and he asked me to identify myself. I said, I'm glad you asked that question. My name is Hernando De Soto. I am the son of Alberto Soto de la Jara, of Arequipa. My mother is Rosa Polar Ugarteche, of Moquegua. And interestingly enough, they met many years ago. Actually, my mother's family originally, they said they came from Italy. My father's actually come from Jaén in Spain, and he said, you know, would you just show me your passport? And so I showed him my passport, and he began believing me. And when he began believing me, I said, now this is really interesting. In fact, he doesn't really believe me. He believes a document that is about me. And I remembered at that time Bertrand Russell, the British philosopher, who had said that the majority of knowledge that we obtain in this world is not actually through acquaintance, which is how I've met many good friends and future friends here at the State University of Colorado State University, but it is actually through knowledge by description, by what is written. And if you think about what you know about Kazakhstan or what you know about Mongolia, probably the majority of you haven't been there, but you know it exists by description because it's been written. And so here I started realizing that my identity really was not in me. I mean, back home, among about 2,500 people, maybe 3,000 or 4,000, people can recognize me because of the way I look at them in the eyes, because of my gait, because of the fact that I've lost hair and I'm identified with that. I got a beard. So there's a lot of redundancy, but it doesn't go beyond a few thousand people. But the whole world can get to know me through a passport, which has got all sorts of information that is crossed about me. And therefore, I realized at that moment that one of the crucial aspects of globalization is that we actually know each other by description. And so the question then becomes, how many people in the world are actually described in such a bona fide sort of way that we can deal with them. Because maybe if we cannot deal with them or we can't know about them through the description, maybe they can't participate in the economy as well. As a matter of fact, in that context, I've had Dean Menon as my witness. I purchased an apple recently at the hotel, so he knows that this apple I have here is my apple. And therefore, he will have absolutely no doubt in certifying that this apple is mine. But if you look at this apple, no matter how you look at it, no matter where you, from what angle you see it, there's nothing on this apple, outside or inside, that says this is Hernando's apple. There's nothing on this apple that says that I own it. There's nothing that says that I can sell it, that I can buy it, that I can transfer it, that I can loan it, that I can lease it, that I can rent it, that I can pledge it, that I can use it as collateral, that I can mortgage it, that it's a point of collection. None of that. All of that kind of information, always travels in documents that tell you about this, which means something very important, that in the world of business and commerce, there's at least two worlds of reality. There's the world of physical things, and there's the world of statements about things. And statements come in two forms. They come either in the form of personal context, where we have beliefs, where we have hopes, where we have desires, and then that's what we tell each other, and they come in the form of enforceable statements. And it's really the enforceable statements that end up giving an apple a variety of functions that it didn't have before. For example, in Peru, we used to have the Peruvian telephone company, Compañía Peruana de Teléfonos, which was worth, according to the shares on the market, we all had shares, they were quoted on the stock exchange, and it was worth about $52 million. And when all of a sudden we decided to sell it at the beginning of privatization times in 1990, we started finding out that we couldn't sell it because nobody actually believed in the title to the company. That what happened, it was under Peruvian law, and that Peruvian law was not recognizable elsewhere. So we actually spent 3 years, part of the team was from my institute, to actually create a property document over the telephones, not only the physical telephones, the wires, but also everything that had to do with telecommunications. And then we went out in the market to sell it, and we had a bid, and it was won by the Spaniards, and they paid us $2 billion for the telephone company. $2 billion is 37 times more than $52 million, which meant that just giving the company a passport, giving it an identity on the market, raised its value 37 times. And there's a lot of clear explanations for that. It is that all of a sudden you could do the company, a lot of things with the company that you couldn't do before. I mean, we hadn't, by the way, painted the business, the business offices of the company. We hadn't renewed the telephones. We hadn't repaired the broken windows. All we did was just give it an identity, and that identity made it travel through the market. And that's what made us starting to think that it was important to establish property over things, and that maybe not only property, but the whole of business law was more than just simply ink on paper. Maybe all of this business law had created a reality very different from the reality of physical things, what maybe would have been called by Michel Foucault an episteme, a place where knowledge is organized. As a matter of fact, Adam Smith did talk about this ethereal world, this virtual world, and he talked about the invisible hand. Or once in a while, he talked that what actually made deals possible was like a wagon way through the air. Even Carl Gustav Jung, the psychologist, said, look, most things actually happen in the unconscious world, in the collective subconscious. So it is some time now that we know through philosophers and thinking men that we don't only have a world that is created by physical things, we have a world where things and how we think about things comes together. And what I am trying to tell you, and what will be my message over the rest of this talk, is that that world is something that in a way you North Americans have created. And that's why we look very much towards you, but you're not necessarily very conscious of it. To what degree this world actually makes you such an efficient country. One of the things that made me think about this was that back to about 200 years ago, or a little bit more, in your country, people would be proud that they were nail makers. For example, Thomas Jefferson identified himself within the Jefferson family as being the nail maker. He wrote in a letter to one of the people around him of what he was, a politician, a philosopher. He said, "I am a nail maker." Why? Because in those days, before we discovered how you cut up wire and make nails out of them, each nail took some time to build. And when you had finally constructed these nails, these are what held buildings together. And nails were so important that as you moved from the east to the west in your manifest destiny, every time you decided to move, or so an American citizen would move a little bit further west, you'd burn down your cabin just to be able to recuperate the nails. In other words, not everything that makes things are the things themselves, but the things that fasten them, that bind them. And essentially, a market economy is essentially about putting things together. And it's more than just simply putting different physical things together. It has to do with putting people together, with putting ideas together. In that context, I remember, if you haven't read it, another essay I recommend is one by an American economist, Leonard Read, which is called I, Pencil. Leonard Read talks about physically what it takes to build a pencil. And he talks about the fact that it requires graphite from Sri Lanka. But the graphite will break. And so he says it has to be wetted down by candelia wax from Mexico. And also sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid that comes from Italy. And also it has to be, it has to be then baked. It has to be baked in different places. And also you've got to bring in wood, in different cedar wood, in different slats from Oregon. And then when you join the eraser to the pencil, you've got to make sure that you've got enough zinc from Peru and copper from Chile and black nickel from Nigeria to make the whole thing come together. And the wonderful essay is that at the end, he says, look at your very simple pencil, and it took 1,600 enterprises to actually make it, and all over the world. And that's the kind of message that, of course, we know since a long time. That's what Adam Smith told us, and even Karl Marx. They said the reason why, they didn't know it at the time, but the Industrial Revolution seems to be bringing so much wealth to North America and Europe is essentially because of the division of labor. And the division of labor means that we were able to pull resources together from different other parts, bring them together. But what they didn't so much focus upon was that even though you could divide labor and specialize, you needed something to bring it all together, to nail it together. And my issue is that you can only start nailing things together through certain legal devices that you take for granted and that we haven't adopted fully. One of them is identity, the passport. How can you do anything with anybody if you don't have an identity? How can you even have a system of internet if you don't have internet addresses? How can you actually be able to communicate within a network if you don't have protocols, if you don't have rules? These things are immensely necessary, and the same thing happens for a market economy. You need to have a variety of tools that actually bring things together. And if we can just concentrate on property for a while, and then I'll get into the other pivots that I think are crucial. Even property doesn't just only bring you surplus value because a company is identified. It gives you surplus value because it makes an Apple or a telephone company fungible. In other words, the moment that the Peruvian telephone company has been represented on paper, it can be used as collateral to be able to get credit. Or the moment it's on paper, it can be broken up into different dozens and thousands of little pieces which are called shares, which are pieces of property that can then be sold, and that can raise investment. Who's going to invest if you can't get a piece of property in exchange? So the moment things are represented on paper, the moment they take a legal significance, they are become like a Swiss penknife. They not only bring out one blade, they can bring up to 26 blades. They bring out credit, they bring out capital, they bring out identity, and all of it is based essentially on the law. I went recently, I had a conversation with your former chairman of of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan. And he called me over because he just read my book, The Mystery of Capital, and he said that he'd want to talk about certain things with me, and I was, of course, very desirous to do so. And one of the reasons I wanted to do is because I wanted to see him is because I wanted to ask a few very simple questions, which I told him, by the way, that I would be telling you about. So to give myself whatever I had to say a certain degree of authority. So I told him, Mr. Greenspan, I'm most honored by this meeting. Tell me one thing. How do you know how much money to issue in the United States? So he said, that's an interesting question, but it's a very simple reply. I try and find out how much exchanges there's going to be, and I try and give enough money, enough liquidity, so that these transactions can take place with U.S. currency, and to make sure that there's also enough liquidity so as to act as credit. And I said, and how do you happen to know this? I hear you have excellent intelligence services. And he said, well, actually, they're not that good, but they actually don't work for me. So it's not there that I know. Well, how do you do it? Do you have Federal Reserve officers in front of different factories, see how many sofas and automobiles are going out, how many trailers are going in? He said, no, not like that. We just look at markets. And what do you see in these markets? And then he caught on, of course, and he said, well, we see property documents being exchanged. So I said, now, can you try and imagine a country in the world, Afghanistan, Iraq, Peru, the Philippines, and I can guarantee you now that maybe 80 to 90% of these countries, there are no property titles over things. How would you then begin issuing money? And he said, that's a very interesting question. I don't know the reply to that. So without property, without business law, there's also no good money. And then I said, now, when you have money and you want to get into the economy, how do you go about it? Do you walk around in a convertible and hand out bags of money? How is it done in your country? And he said, well, the way we do it is actually we have a banking system. And in the banking system, the bankers get informed of who needs money, and then they ask these people to identify themselves, to give track records, because they've got companies that can be traced with addresses. And once they've done that, they then pass those documents on to me, and I rediscount it. And I said, can you try and imagine a country where 80 or 90% of the assets, like in Iraq, like in Afghanistan, like in Egypt, like in Peru, and I'll get more to those numbers later on, there are no property titles over things. We just know who owns what, like in Tarzan films. You see an arrow crossing you in the jungle, and you know you're not going to walk in there because it belongs to somebody else. That's more or less the way we are. How would you get the money down to the people? And the reply was, gee, I really don't know. And that's where we are today. Let me tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in the world with my organization. We've been trying to collect numbers on data that is not written on paper. We've gone around to try and find out how many people actually have a legal title or a recorded title on their buildings in Egypt. And the reply is 8%. 92% don't. We've done the same thing in Mexico, and we get to roughly 75% that don't. We've been in Tanzania, and 99% of all assets in Tanzania don't have title to them. In Peru, the figures now range around about 80%. In the Philippines, it's somewhere around 68, 69%. So what we started to discover is that in this world, post-Berlin Wall, everybody in the world, and I repeat, with the exception maybe of North Korea, Zimbabwe, and Cuba, have basically adopted the rules of free trade, the rules of stable currency, the rules of market economies, but they haven't given their people the passports within which to travel in the market. As a result of which, they're like me in front of your migrations officer, talking to each other at no purpose, and there's nothing to actually certify who is what and who owns what. We've done something else. We've gone out recently and tried to find out, since we're supposedly all on the all organized in companies, how many companies in the third world and in the former Soviet Union have actually got all the tools that your companies do? Let me try and define that. You are now in the United States, together with Western Europe and some Eastern European countries, you're about 1 billion people. And you're all identified with an ID document. You all have property titles over your assets. You all have business organizations that are registered according to law. There are certain exceptions like the Sopranos, but most of you are there. Okay, now what we've gone out is to find out what's happening in the rest of the world, the 5 billion that are the former Soviet Union and developing countries. And here's the kind of numbers we're getting. We're trying to find out how many people actually, when they have a company that is separate from the family. In other words, how many people can actually say that as a result of the Industrial Revolution, they have decided to tackle business matters, though these may belong to the family, in a separate hierarchical order, where you know who's the CEO, you know who's the chairman, what their obligations are. You can contract people from outside as specialists. You've got ways of remunerating them. You've got ways of giving them status. You've got ways of making them cooperate and divide labor so that they can specialize and bring together all those resources that allow you, for example, to make a pencil. And we have found out that it is really no more than about 3 to 5% of all the companies in the world. In other words, if you go to most of the firms that actually work in Peru, or the ones that work in Mexico, you go in there and you ask in a workshop, all right, who's the head of this company? Because I want to make a deal. And then out comes a man with a big mustache and he says, I'm Juan Dominguez, me, I'm the head. And you look at him, you look at his wife, and you realize by the way she's staring at you that she really runs the place, but you're not that sure. You don't know what structure because it's all mixed up together. Valdez and Maturana would have called the family an autopoietic institution. It is an institution, the purpose of which is its survival. An allopoietic institution is an organization, the purpose of which is to generate additional wealth, additional things, to produce additional things. And one of the interesting things about you Americans that is not so much recorded is that the fact that once you were all open to a market economy, it took you about 100 years to bring everybody inside that market economy by creating easy access to forming a business. Until about the 1850s, most of your ancestors who wanted to form a company inside the United States had first of all to ask for an act of Congress, either federal Congress or your local Congress. You needed a political authorization. It was only starting about 1811 that you started getting automatic registration. And then only for certain types of companies, maybe textile companies, maybe garden companies, and it took time. And people resisted the creation of companies because they said, you are creating states in little. The only people who should be allowed self-government are sovereign nations. If you create governments for different private institutions, one day these will come and challenge the nation as such. These are states in little, and the resistance was enormous. The right to understand that aside from the tribe, aside from the family, aside from the church, you needed a special organization that could do specific tasks that allowed you to identify people on the market and allowed you to talk to people that you'd never met before was something you really only fully achieved in the last 120 years. And Japan probably only got ending the Second World War. The second thing that is important is that you know how to capture investment. Why? Because you can issue shares, as I mentioned before. Now, imagine what it would be a company that can't issue shares or that can't bring in separate participation. Well, that's a situation of 95% of all companies in the third world. They can't issue shares. So how can you get investment? Not only that, the reason they can't do that is because they don't have divisible stock. What they've got are apples. And when we've done the statistics all the way from the Soviet Union into China, not the people that are very prosperous and thriving on the coast, but inland where 1 billion other people are, they don't have these sorts of organizations. We have been seeing also perpetual succession. In other words, once you Americans decide to transfer whatever wealth you have accumulated, you not only say, well, this company has got chairs and it's got tables and it's got some flower pots and it's got a podium. You say, no, there's a going concern value. This company, like the University of Colorado, is not only the building, it is also all the reputation that you've got, all the knowledge that you've got, which is intangible. Now, where do you catch that reputation? Well, you catch it on pieces of paper. You catch it on a series of documents, of business documents that you have, where the value is stated. So therefore, when one of you dies, you actually transfer capital, which is the value not only of things in their physical state, but the goodwill, the going concern value. Now, how many companies in the third world and the former Soviet Union have actually got perpetual succession? And the reply is it's not more than 5%. And so the argument I'm trying to bring you along is the following one. It is that the market economy is not only a space where people can trade. The market economy, and that's why I'm so glad to be here this evening, is also about business organizations. It's about the capacity to get organized and to represent yourself in a way that you can be recognized elsewhere, to take value, to be able to record value, to state it in a world that is full of intangibles. It's virtual reality. And that kind of information is the one that allows you to trade among each other, divide labor, and reach high degrees of productivity. And what I'd like to tell you is that over the last years, as you've created business schools and you've created business law and you've created economic law, you have actually created a new form of organization in the world, which is actually where most of your value comes from. And the reason that we think that the system is not functioning in the rest of the world is simply because these business assets or these business organizations that are so familiar to you actually don't operate in the rest of the world. We've loaded it with a lot of literature about how the macroeconomic system should work, but actually every time that the West has gone out, and even ourselves, the elites of developing countries have looked at poor people, we've told them, this is much too complex for you. If you're small and little and skinny, what you need are little pants and little shirts. Let's not bother you with corporations. Let's not bother you with business law. And the result is that we have nations of shrimps, people that do not have all the tools and the instruments that are necessary to navigate the market. And that is, among other things, because, of course, we are under the spell that the differences continue to be cultural. And what we have discovered is that wherever you go in the world, you find out that the message which the United States has brought out and that Western Europe has brought out, which is that the only way to get organized in a market, actually has sunk in. These are not the 1945s or the 1940s when Karl Polanyi said, you know, the small people or the little people of all developing countries do not have a cultural sympathy with Western methods. They have sunk in. What they're missing are the tools, both property tools and the business organizations that allow you not only to create money, credit, and identity, but also to create order. It goes way beyond economics. You probably are familiar with at least in my days, it used to be a terrific program that came in from the United States, a series called Miami Vice, which consisted of essentially two very handsome American cops, which were generally after a Colombian or Peruvian like myself. And the way they caught their man, their Peruvian or their Colombian, was by a system called skip tracing, which consisted of, right at the beginning of the show, one of the two cops would get, I think it was in a red convertible, go to one address. This terrific looking blonde comes in and they say, where's that rat De Soto? And he says, he's left, he's gone to 101 Ocean Drive. So off they go in their red convertible and they go to 100 Ocean Drive and this terrific brunette comes out and he says, that rat De Soto, he's off in 353 Stewart Street. So off they go to 353 Stewart Street. Including commercials, after 45 minutes, they catch me at the wharf. Now, how do they get there It's from one address to the other. If you look at policemen, they go from one address to the other. That's the way order is kept. We know who owns what everywhere and who rents to who. So what happens in countries that don't have property rights? Iraq, Afghanistan, Venezuela, etc. No addresses. Cops don't work. And at that moment, there's disorder. So what I'm trying to tell you is that this system of business law not only may allow business to work, but actually the order that pervades in your society is due to a series of pivotal institutions that you have created over time and that have consequences that go way beyond simply business. I mean, what has happened is that the argument of the market has been so powerful, even though heads of state may talk against it at the General Assembly of the United Nations and elsewhere, even though it essentially has destroyed all other systems, that if you don't bring along with it business organizations, there is nothing to replace the dying institutions that have been left in the wake of the coming of the market revolution. And here Karl Marx was extremely clear. Karl Marx, when he said that religion is the opium of the people, he didn't mean that he was against religion. He just simply said that if you leave most of the people disarmed vis-a-vis market forces, and at that time, of course, he was concerned and outraged essentially by the injustice, the tremendous separation between the rich and the poor, or what he would call the capitalist and the proletariat. What actually happened is that in the face of this invasive market, people would then reach towards old traditional organizations, whether they be the feudal organizations, whether they be religious organizations, and that would be the worst contradiction of capitalism. And that's basically what I think is happening. If you declare the markets are universal, but you do not teach the rest of the world how you create a business organization, because you yourself are not necessarily conscious of a business organization, nor are we. I'm not trying to pin the blame on you. We have, in fact, what I'm trying to say is an incomplete market revolution. It's not that markets don't work. It's that the full formula for markets to work isn't quite clear. And the only argument that we get against it is essentially people that come up from National Geographic magazines and anthropology books and say, people resist markets and don't like it. Well, let me tell you, one of the things that we have done is we started accepting contracts from heads of state in Africa, because we were told that the place was run by tribes. And one of the first places that we went to visit, on the basis of a contract with President Mkapa, now President Kikwete of Tanzania, was of course their country. And we constituted a research team of about 975 people, because the objective was to get information that wasn't on the books. And we covered the whole 26 provinces to start finding out how much of the territory was actually run by tribes. And the result that we have gotten is the following one. 10% of the territory is run by tribes, and 90% of the territory is run by private business, albeit illegal. And all of production, 1% is produced by tribes, and 99% by private companies, but private companies of very poor, impoverished people, without property rights, without limited liability. Do you know what it's like? You have to be a South American to know this. Do you know what it's like to get into business with unlimited liability? Where every time you get into business, you're liable for everything, including your house, your family, the possibility of slave trade. Yet you created a wonderful institution called limited liability, where on paper you can define just how much you're going to risk things. So what I'm going to try and show you now, on the basis of some clippings from photographs of what we found out in Tanzania, is to show you what we found there. The first thing that we found, not only in Tanzania, but in different parts of the world, is that wherever we have gone, I'd like to start off with this, you will see here that in every country, all the way from Argentina to Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, every time we've gone into that extra legal sector, which is 80 to 90% of the population, we haven't found one asset, one house, one donkey, one business that doesn't actually have a legal document a law document that represents it, but they're all extra legal. In other words, the tendency of every developing country is that even since government won't give them the documents with which to defend themselves, they have been giving themselves their own documents. So the result is that you do get documents, but there's one for every neighborhood. There's a different one. I mean, back in the good old days, back about 1856, when somebody bothered counting how many jurisdictions there were in California after the gold rush, they found out that there were 800 jurisdictions, and you had in California 800 systems to verify property. Of course, what you did over 50 years is put them all together. You also had up to about 1870, I think, 700 different currencies. Not only the greenback, you also had the yellowback, you also had the brownback, and then you put it all together. That's when the rule of law came in. What I'm just simply telling you is that in all developing countries, they look pretty much now the way they did in the times of the California gold rush. And at that time, there was a lot of disorder in the United States. Recently, one of your academics gave me a speech, a fantastic speech, which was a speech given by Abraham Lincoln, the congressman, in 1836 in St. Louis. And when he came in to St. Louis, he said he was aghast, 1836, and he said, what have we come to? After a war of independence where we had put together a constitution where we're going to start respecting our rights, again, the same thing that happens to me in so many U.S. towns and cities. I have come in a horse-drawn carriage, and again, I have not been able to see the sunset for the amount of corpses hanging on the boughs of trees that, like Spanish moss, act as curtains and don't let me see the sunset. And what he was saying is that basically the United States was a pretty violent place in the 19th century. You did a lot of shooting, just like your films indicate, because the rule of law didn't come in. It took you a good 70, 80, 90 more years to really put it all together. It doesn't mean that there weren't places where the rule of law didn't work. As a matter of fact, even in Peru, even in Egypt, there is a 10% of us who, talk as much as we can like you. We understand 90% of the jokes on Saturday Night Live. And those people are under the rule of law, but the majority are not. And while they're not, they're going to rebel against the system, because the way it works is if you don't have the benefits that other people have, then you rebel against it. So wherever we have gone, in every developing country, from China to Tanzania to Mexico, where you have large, huge black markets, there isn't one where people are not manifesting themselves on paper. And we have found that, and these are the statistics on Tanzania, and we have found that the reason for that, of course, is the cost of the law. It takes you 549 days to get a legal paper on a grocery store in Egypt. It can take you about 17 years to get a property title in Egypt. It can take you about 25 years to get it in the Philippines. The access to law is not clear, and nobody's taking much care of all of that. When we have gone in Tanzania, which has a very low gross national product per capita of actually $270 per person. That's what they get a year. So we're talking about people that are less than $1 in a day. We haven't found one place where land isn't being adjudicated by informal authorities. And we haven't found one piece of land which doesn't actually have a title to it, albeit an extra-legal title. We haven't found one village that doesn't have a property recordation office, but that is actually managed by the local authorities that are not vetted by official law. We haven't found one piece of land that is not fungible, at least on the basis of local authorities, and that is to say that it can be used for getting credit. We have found, wherever we have gone, property documents that indicate that they're being used as collateral for, of course, extremely high interest rates, because they can only do it among neighbors. We haven't found one piece of land where there isn't a testament, and that is to say somebody willing to legate to the future. We haven't found one business organization that doesn't have an act of an incorporation. We haven't found one business that doesn't have division of labor. We haven't found one business that doesn't distinguish labor from management. We haven't found any organization that doesn't have people that one way or other record tracks. We haven't found one bull or one cow that isn't branded to indicate that it belongs to somebody. So when somebody comes to me and says, well, look, these people are different. They don't believe in the private sector. They don't believe in business. They don't believe in competition. They're culturally different. This is just simply not true. The whole world is ready for a market economy. The whole world is ready for your kind of society. And the problems that we usually have, of course, in every developed country and in every developing country is that those who are on the right know what to do, but don't care about poor people. And those who are on the left care about poor people, but they don't know what to do. And until we start getting facts about what is actually happening in the former Soviet Union and elsewhere, it's going to be very difficult to establish order where today there is widespread disorder. One of the things that I had talked about in the last conference, and one of my friends here said that I should talk to you about, is one of the things we found out simply because we were curious in Peru. A very important characteristic of our country together with Brazil is that during the 1930s and 1940s, over about 6 million Japanese migrated to both Peru and Brazil, which were the only two countries in South America which were completely open to Asian migration. And one of the sons of these families was Alberto Fujimori, who became then president of Peru. And of course, all sorts of Japanese families also went to Brazil, including the Yoshiyamas. Now here's a question. Why did Alberto Fujimori's family come to Peru and the Yoshiyamas go to Brazil, and why didn't the De Sotos go to Japan? Or the Lulas go to Japan? And the reason for that is because back in the 30s and the 40s, we South Americans were 3 times richer than Japan on a per capita basis. That's why we had so much migration. You also had them as well. It's only starting 1945 till 1952 that Japan was flipped. And it changed from being a feudal system, mark you, one that builds airplanes. So what? The Brazilians do. One that actually can build ships. So what? The Argentines do as well. But it doesn't mean that if you have a piece of Switzerland in your country, you've got a market economy. If the rest of the country looks like Nigeria. What happens is that Japan switched around because there was a class of people that became very conscious that the superior power of the United States came not only because it talked about markets, but it had established a different form of getting organized. And that was the business association. And all these tools that came with it. Nobody had that quite clear, but they knew that you had to imitate the United States because it had something going for it. And so even before winning the war against Japan, MacArthur thought it out. And I always thought that the MacArthur's plan for the Pacific was so much more ingenious and so much better than the Marshall Plan of what you did in Europe, because essentially what you did is you helped the Japanese convert a feudal economy into a market economy literally overnight. And there's a blueprint for it. And that blueprint was followed not only in Japan, but also in 2 other colonies of Japan, Korea and Taiwan. And it was so successful that 28 years later, when Deng Xiaoping came to power in China, he said, look, I don't care what color the cat has, whether it's red or whether the cat is white. The important thing is that it catches mice. And you started the Chinese Revolution. And that was one of the most ingenious things you did. And then you got into Vietnam, and then you got into Iraq, and you forgot about it. You forgot that the secret of winning wars and getting people on your side is getting the majority, not the minority, on your side. And that the majority are actually looking for the same things that people are looking all over the world, and it's a market economy. And it's very important not to talk about this in ideological terms. It's important to go out and get the facts. Find out, whenever you go to any African country, if you find public cows, if you find public bulls, if you find public business or you find private business. And I can tell you, because I've been there and I've been in Ethiopia, that has a GNP per capita of $70, that what you find is private. And it's about time that this myth should be broken. I think that to a great degree, and I'm going to end now because I think I've reached the 45 minutes allotted to me by my friend Ajay Menon, is that the comparison I'd like to make is a little bit like the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics basically says that the universe tends towards disorder. That's the way it's going. Everybody saw it. already, of course, Darwin saw it. Of course, at the same time, later on, Einstein saw it. And they said, what protects us from disorder, because that's the way the universe is going, into disarray, is actually every time you have warm little ponds, enclosed environments. Because in enclosed environments, what happens is that you get protected from this swirling mass of lifeless particles that are in the universe, and you're able to organize complexity and deal with disorder. And that's how Darwin said that, that life began. Because in protected warm little ponds, cells began to grow. Life wants to grow wherever it can. I believe that in the United States, when you started leading, together with Britain, the formation of business companies, you actually allowed your part of civilization to deal with the breakdown of feudalism and patrimonialism, and allowed you to slip away from it and establish the order of freedom, which requires organization. And that's what you learn, of course, at business schools, how to do it. But you have to be aware of exactly all the tools that you've been given, of all the 26 blades that happen, that come with a penknife. Because it is in those protected environments where the real source, the real source of order is. In other words, what I think has happened since the Second World War, as you have effectively defeated the Soviet Union and you have defeated communism and said, that doesn't work, look how much more we can grow under a private system, everybody has adopted the market laws, and we haven't done enough of business organizations yet, which are crucial to navigate the market. The market without business organizations is a terrible place. It's a fearsome place. And that is why people, when they find that they don't have those vehicles, will go back to the religious beliefs, and the extreme ones, and will go back to feudal organizations the way they are in Afghanistan, and will go back to the poppy fields, and will go back to the coca fields, because human beings have to cooperate, but they're not doing it in the right way. So I'm really delighted to be here in a business school that is conscious not only about its role in the United States, but that is venturing forward to saying that you may have something to tell the rest of the world. Because the real key is, how do you make markets sustainable, not only to catch prosperity, but to catch peace? Thank you very much.
We'll take questions. We'll take questions from you. We have about 15 minutes. Each one of you next to you should have a note card. You can write your questions. We have our students collecting them.
To repeat your question so that everybody is in on it, you come from South Africa and you think that a lot of what you've been hearing this evening reflects what's going on in South Africa. I get the same impression too by looking at South Africa, and of course so do many South Africans. Because you're really, like many developing countries, two societies. Part of you is Switzerland, and part of you is Nigeria. And of course, when all these people that are very, very poor, and that are basically organized tribally, meet the market society organized in corporations, there's just no competition. And instead of actually studying what successful developed countries do with their indigenous societies, like for example in the United States, when you face the issue of what were you going to do with Eskimo organizations in Alaska, among other things, you had to put order because you needed to drill. You need to have clear property rights. You've helped the Alaskans get organized into corporations. That's a no-no in South Africa. But that's the way developed countries actually deal. In other words, there's nothing wrong with the tribes. You've simply got to, like there's nothing wrong with the church. One is organized for faith, the other one's organized for the family. Each organization has its own rules, but to do business, to be able to trade back and forth, you need business organizations. So we know that in South Africa, there are people that think like us, and they're trying to bring everybody in. And the debate, of course, goes on whether you should or you shouldn't. And the old argument continues to be, among many other people, that there is such a thing as tribal bliss, and that most people don't want to come in, don't want to come into the market. And what we have to do, and I think that's very important because you American universities have got the resources to do, it's time that we went out there and got the statistics. We are now, for example, working with President Fox in Mexico, who asked us to look at his traditional organizations, the ejidos, which are, we could say, the communal organizations. And we've gone there and we found out the average age in an ejido, a communal organization in Mexico, is about 65 years old, which means all the young people have already left, and they've probably come to the United States. So it's about time we got the facts of whether everything we're seeing in the Discovery Channel and National Geographic magazine is really true. Let's get the facts and then start offering people the option to go in for the modern world. And I have a feeling that South Africa is no different than the rest of us. There's an elite that is Westerners, that are basically westernized, like you and I, and there's another part, and we forget there are about 4 billion people in the world. In other words, we're 5 billion in developing and Soviet Union countries, and 1 billion more or less are like us, know how to move in the Western world, and 4 billion are completely outside the system. And that even happens in China. You know, China's got 1,300,000,000 inhabitants, and the people that are now competing with us and give our businessmen, both in the United States and Peru and France, nightmares, are really 250 million, roughly the size of the United States. The other 1,050,000,000 are not inside the system. And we know that only last year they had over 85,000 rebellions because they're feeling the clash with corporations and businesses that are so much more effective than they are. They now have in China probably one of the highest Gini factors in the world, which is the distance between the poorest and the richest. And that's what happens when you only give business tools to one part and you don't let the rest partake. So I'm afraid that South Africa is facing the same dilemma that the rest of us are.
How would you address the dead capital in terms of property rights in areas where a common philosophy is that land or earth cannot be possessed?
I'm not saying that there are areas where you don't have communal land, but most places where we have gone to, we have actually found private land. I think I give in my book, The Mystery of Capital, what occurred to me when I was traveling in Indonesia. I was going in the rural areas where I was told that everything was communal. And I've tried the same thing in Peru. I walked among communal land and I found out that every 200 yards or so, a different dog would bark. I said, well, this is communal land. Why are different dogs barking at different places? And then we find out that essentially, to title communal land is something that takes 5 days. To title private land takes 17 days. So people, what they do is to protect themselves from graft, to protect themselves from bribery, to protect themselves from corrupt officers, generally buy a big eggshell where we're all in there communally, we can have our own authorities, but inside everybody owns his house. I haven't come to a place in Africa, even in a village, in a tribal village, where the tribal chief goes in and out of every hut. It just doesn't happen. Everybody owns their hut. And just like you, they've got a little bit of communal land. Those are the streets. That's a police officer. That's a police headquarters. That's the park. I think it would be extremely good to actually find out how much of it is communal. And even if it's communal, it's very important that people understand that the menu offers the possibility of communal and private. Some people will go for communal, but it should be a private decision. And when you start having these private decisions, things will work out. So I have nothing against going to a country and finding out that most of the property is communal. I just hesitate to ascertain that in most cases, at least the ones I have visited, most of the property is communal. And if it should be, it should work according to titles so that people can protect it according to their wishes. I just don't think we've asked the people what it is that they want.
What is the role for universities in making your goals a possibility?
I think that you're obviously the most successful nation in the world. And the tendency of successful people is to forget how they got there. I mean, it's not useful. Karl Popper used to talk about that. This was the Austrian philosopher turned British. He once went with a friend to see a famous violinist play. I forget it was what he was playing. Say it was Bach on the fiddle, on the violin, and he played and went from the second to the third overture, and it seems it was extraordinary to the point that Karl Popper and his friends started crying. It was so beautiful. So afterwards, they decided to visit him in the place behind the stage where he prepared himself, and they went to tell him, Maestro, you were fantastic. How is it that you were able to go from the second to the third movement? And Carl Busch, the violinist, said, well, look, I'm an old man now. I don't mind giving my secrets. Let me tell you. And he put his violin to his neck, and he took his fiddle, and he couldn't play it again. I'll give you that same story, another version. It seems that the spider with 8 legs meets the centipede. And the spider says, you know, I get a lot of trouble just organizing 8 legs. How do you do it with 100? And then the centipede says, well, it's very simple. You have, first of all, have to move the 10 first on your right, and that caterpillar has not been able to move since, the centipede. What I'm trying to tell you is that when you end up being virtuoso in something, you don't break it down in an analytical thing, among other things, because you may lose the magic. Well, it's about time now, since we're in a very dangerous world, where a war at the end of the world does touch us, wherever we are, and it is contagious, that we go back to find out, and I think it is the responsibility of business schools, which is why I'm congratulating you getting into sustainable development, to find out what is it exactly that you did to get there. Because it should be no different from the rest of us. Why was it that you actually brought a capitalist system to function for everybody in Japan, where you once had a feudal system? You've got one now in Afghanistan, and you're not doing what you did in Japan. You've got one in Iraq, and you're not doing what you did in Taiwan. You did certain things right at the beginning of your history, and it's time to go and look back at it. And look at it from third world eyes, from Soviet Union eyes, because you've destroyed ideologically all the other options. So anarchy is the only alternative what you've got. So I think the rules of universities like yours that study business is also to get in to find out, why are they sustainable in your case? What did you do right at the time of the genesis? When it's functioning, and Carl Busch is playing on his violin, it's quite clear. The question is how he got there, and how do you teach that? And that's still a frontier that I think we haven't crossed. That's why, again, I'm so happy to be here.
The United States and most of the developed world is operating far beyond its ecological footprint. Should developing countries really strive to be where the United States is today by taking the same path to development and therefore be unsustainable?
Times have changed. I mean, when you started capitalism, you also had slavery. That's not acceptable. Your women didn't vote. That's not acceptable. Oliver Twist was in the streets of London asking for alms. That's not acceptable. Obviously, we have to modernize. But you did do some things, I'm sure, that are still eternal truths, and we should learn them.
What are the best strategies for providing equitable access for women to the tools and capital for business organizations?
We have found there are many things that you can do. First of all, of course, put women where they're not in equal footing. And that is generally done through written law, because that gives women the access to norms that allow them to protect themselves. And one of the crucial places is property law. For example, in Peru, when we started off, and when we talk about property law, we're not just talking about titling in the old way. We actually modified legislation across the board. I need to explain how that worked. We started finding out that if we only focused on property law, we could get a better title, a better computer recording it. But it didn't solve the problems of inequity. One of the problems that we had in Peru was that women have the right to the homes along with their husbands, provided they're legally married to the husband. That's a testimony that they're put together. It's still the easiest one to sort out. But since in Peru, the process of red tape, working 8 hours a day to get married, still took about 230 days. Most people don't get married in Peru. So what we did is we deregulated the law and brought it down from 230 days to 15, and today women own 68% of the homes in Peru. So property, capitalist tools have an awful lot to do with emancipating women. So, so what I would just simply do is ask the questions. How many women do actually have access to property in each developing country? Start by giving them that. Because, you know, we all live on the surface of the earth. And what we own, the poor, own on the surface of the earth is immense. Our calculation is that the value of buildings, brick by brick, pound by pound of mortar, wood, and nails in developing countries is nothing shorter than $13 trillion. $13 trillion is a lot of money. It's a lot more than the very generous Mr. Gates and Mr. Warren Buffett have given to charity. Lots more. We actually have more resources than you could pull together for us, even if you decided to give us 5% of all your income for the rest of your lives. The problem is that it's not liquid, it's not fungible, and it's not in the right hands. And that gets settled with business laws and property laws. And that way we can mobilize much more resources than all your charities put together.
China is often criticized for having relatively poor protection of property rights. How is it then that China is growing at such an amazing rate today?
They do have property rights. Now, they don't have fee simple like you do in the United States. In other words, when you get a piece of property, it's yours like forever. Well, you've got eminent domain coming in, you've got taxes, but basically it's yours, therefore, provided you comply with the law. In the case of China, for the moment, it's, I think, about 70 years. You get it's like the British system. They copied it from Hong Kong. 70 years for land in the urban areas, and I think now about 30 to 40, but you can double it and triple it in the countryside. And that's enough to start it getting going. Nobody said that fee simple was the best thing. The important thing is to identify people with their assets first. And then experience will indicate which of the best systems is possible. The reason the Chinese don't give fee simple, of course, is because they're born of a Marxist ideology. And the Marxist ideology says Marx was a very poor lawyer and was not able to actually see the importance of law in economic organization. He thought law was a superstructure. And he also thought that property, since he saw it accumulated in few hands, was an alternative word for robbery. And so he never dwelt much of it. And most of the Chinese, of course, are scared to give fee simple, which means long property rights on things. They give short property rights, but they all have them. Every time a business of yours in the United States does a transaction with the Chinese, you know who you're writing to, you know who can be held accountable, and you know their addresses. They've got property rights. Over 250 million people. The problem is the other 1 billion and 50 million which don't have it yet. Just to add to that, from what we've seen in Latin America, where we've been trying to imitate you for the last 150 years or so, is that getting the first 10 or 20% into capitalism is the easy part. The tough part is the other 80%. Because among other things, the arguments haven't gone out. You know, they're so simple. You find out that in many places in Latin America, for example, there are some of your investors, mainly in oil and in natural resources, staking out the ground, and then they run into troubles with tribal people. And you find that there's these disputes going all the time, and then come a series of NGOs to intervene to protect the poor. We think that there's a simpler solution to that. If these tribal people had property rights, you wouldn't have a problem. You'd be able to stake it out at the beginning. If they own the oil company would have to make a deal with them. Once everything's split up, you build up like you do in the United States. Instead of that, of course, since we haven't given property titles to tribes because we think that they have a different order all by themselves, they see an American company coming in. It comes in not only with the notary public law of Peru, not only with the civil law of Peru on its side, it's also got MIG of the World Bank behind it, and OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation of the United States, behind it. Now, why is somebody without a property title not going to consider that imperialism? I mean, if the other guy's got all the papers and I've got nothing, I'm going to rebel against the system. Solution, give everybody property rights, and people with property rights will come to transactions with each other. But we've got to get the facts in the world. And I repeat, those people who believe in markets, those people who believe in private enterprise have not done the efforts, do not have the budgets to go out and get the facts. And the facts are simply that you would be surprised when you go into tribal regions how many of these people actually have private possessions but no way to protect themselves from those with a piece of paper. You've got to give them the piece of paper, and then they can understand the property right. Let me get into it again because I think it's really important. A property right, as I was saying, is not this. A property right is this. It's born on paper. It's part of your metastructure. It's a mindset among us where we recognize rights, and they're in a written form. If I don't have this and you have this, and you land in Peru, you have violated Peruvian sovereignty. What are you doing, an American company in Peru? If I have a property right, and you have a property right and you come into my country, I'll recognize that it hasn't got anything to do with sovereignty. It's about property. I can buy you, you can buy me, we can loan from each other, we can rent from each other. But to understand that a property right is not equivalent to imperialism, I've got to have one of these, otherwise I can't recognize it. Sorry, it's kind of complicated.
This will be the last question of the evening. Given the message you gave this evening, how would you advise USAID and other such organizations to improve the effectiveness of foreign aid?
Well, first of all, beginning with USAID, they were the first people to recognize us. A lot of our projects were not only funded by USAID, we're funded by Norwegians, we're funded by Swedes, we're funded by different countries and different private organizations and international financial institutions. But the first people to recognize us and fund the kind of work we're doing is USAID. So I actually have a lot of gratitude in terms of USAID. And USAID has tried all over the world to do the kind of things that we're talking about. But it's, again, a question of focus. You are a very complex country. Because you talk simple and you have the art of communication, you look like you're simple, but you're very complex. For example, as a Peruvian, I can tell you, if I have to deal, and I've had to do it in terms of Peruvian government, with France, it's very clear who's in charge of foreign policy. I know who to talk to. If I have to talk to the United States, I talk to the president, he says one thing. The vice president may say a different thing. The State Department says something different. The National Security Council said something different. I get a committee of Democratic senators that come to see me in Lima. They say something different from the committee that comes from Republican senators, because the way that you're organized is that you have a very flat government, a very horizontal government, because your enormous distrust of the concentration of power. And so I would probably think that what's happened with USAID is that since all of these people have a different idea of what you should do with your foreign aid, they're split into 100 items of agenda, and they should concentrate on the kind of things that make business function. But it's not only because the USAID doesn't look at it, it's also because it's probably got 100, 150 mandates. But that are some of the unfortunate consequences of democracy, but it's still best to keep democracy in place. It's a question of simply becoming aware of what gave you success, where were you successful in your foreign policy, in your peacemaking and in your wars abroad, and come to the necessary conclusions, because, as I think one of your presidents once said, if not us, who? If not now, when? Thank you.
If I could just for a minute remind you, this Thursday we will have the former president of Mexico, Ernesto Zedillo, who will deliver the Monfort lecture at the Moby Gym at 7:30 in the evening. You're all invited. You need to get a ticket, which is free, which is one of the few things that goes free anymore. And I personally, on your behalf, on behalf of the students, Mr. De Soto, thank you for your inspiration. But above all, we remain grateful for the most precious gift you have given us, which is your gift of idea. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I say a couple of things about it, Mr. Thank you very much. I nearly forgot, because I saw this little sheet of paper coming in here, that Ernesto Zedillo was coming to see you. So Ernesto Zedillo is, I do recommend that you go listen to him, because he's a very important man. He's made history in Mexico. He's the one who broke in Mexico the one-party system and moved Mexico substantially towards democracy. So I'm glad you're getting, at least in terms of Mr. Zedillo, all the right people coming to Colorado. Thank you.